Hello everyone, greetings from Sri Lanka. So let me introduce myself. I'm Pradeep Kodippili. I'm a researcher of University of Huddersfield for the PhD and working in the Disaster Management Center in Sri Lanka as a Deputy Director for the Early Warning and work as a media spokesperson in the same time for 15 years right now. So my PhD topic is to find out the way of having a better communication system by doing the disaster early warning through electronic media, impact of the next generation of the early warning dissemination on vulnerable communities. As a summary, I need to develop a policy mechanism for the early warning dissemination through electronic media, including an institutional coordination mechanism, responsibilities, the standard operation procedures, activities, early warning and monitoring and auditing system, and for the timely early warning and the dissemination, because we need to ensure the 100% of the reception rate. We need to enhance, and the way of finding the gaps and policies has to be well defined and developed. So, as everyone knows, actually the communication is an ancient process which was began in the era of the Aristotle. And Aristotle introduced the first time the linear communication, one-way communication for the countries. And it has been developed in several ways. The media is one of a very challenging and important point to have a good early warning system for a country. And also I just need to highlight a little bit on and about the Sri Lankan historical and the cultural heritage, because we are celebrating the month of South Asian month of the heritage and the culture. And as you all know about the in Sri Lanka, I'm a Sri Lankan, we're proud to be a Sri Lankan, and it has more than 2,600 years history, but more than that, prior to that, we have ancient and the heritage in Sri Lanka. So, which is known as in Sri Lanka, in the ancient Indian epic Ramayana, the island has numerous other references that testify to the island's natural beauty and the wealth and the history. And Sri Lanka has a cultural depth, is recognized by the UNESCO, and which was declared the 6 archaeological world heritages, which is Anuradhapura, Palannadu, Tambulla, and Sigiri and all. And we have numerous cultural the activities, as well as the Buddhism. There are a lot of religious activities, and the main religion is Buddhism and Hinduism, as well as the Islamic people living together, harmony. It's very, very important. So our cultural heritage plays an important role in creating and enhancing the social capital, because it has the capability to inspire and foster citizens' participations in public life and enhance the quality of life and the well-being of individuals and their communities. That is very important. In South Asian Heritage Month, actually provides an opportunity to celebrate and acknowledge the culture, the history, and the lives of the people with South Asian heritage living in the United Kingdom today, and to provide a greater understanding of why Britain looks as diverse as it does today. That's very important. And the month was established to honor and celebrate South Asian history and the culture. So we need to, be proud South Asian people. And it is an opportunity for everyone to appreciate the countries in South Asia and learn new things about everyone's heritage. Very, very important. And the Sri Lanka heritage and the nature and the culture, the influences can be found in many areas of the Britain, from our food and the clothes and the music and the communication. Not only that, many South Asian influences also can be found in the Britain. So they're enjoying, and it's very, very important to have such kind of a mix and cultural and mixed way of culture and heritage in everywhere in the world. That's very important, as to my mind. And being a Sri Lankan, I'm proud to be a South Asian identity. Our culture, the penetrated most part of the British life, and adds to the richness of their nations. And my research also totally linked with the communication, which has a great history related to Sri Lanka and other countries as well. So finally, I wish you all the best to live all the communities peacefully and harmony. Thank you very much for your kind cooperation.
I am Ravi Jayarathne from Sri Lanka. I am working in the Disaster Management Center as a Deputy Director Emergency Operation. I am studying in the University of Huddersfield as a PhD researcher. I am doing research on disaster early warning network and how it is impacted the agriculture dependent communities in Sri Lanka. My background is the agriculture sector. So I would like to explain how the British and the Asian culture will share their knowledge, experiences with the Sri Lankan society and the culture. In 1815, the British were controlled the country, and that time they introduced the tea plantation to the Sri Lanka, especially in the upcountry. In the upcountry, the very poor road network in that time. So they were developed the railway and road network in the country to bring their production immediately to the main city of Colombo, Sri Lanka, and export, and their income contributed the improved GNP of the Sri Lanka. The development of upcountry affect to the changes of culture, society, law and order, and the management in the country, and especially they open the eye towards the democracy in Sri Lanka. The developing of the upcountry by the road network and other, the job market and opportunity were developed. So development will increase by the adapting the upcountry and introducing the tea plantation into the country. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Anuradha Senanayake, the newest PhD researcher at the Global Disaster Resilience Center, School of Applied Sciences, University of Huddersfield. I was born and brought up in Sri Lanka, and I believe that Sri Lankan culture is a huge impact on my identity, as Sri Lanka is a beautiful island with hospitality and people with kind nature, as we believe that we have to be kind to everyone because they have their own battles. And by profession, I'm a lecturer at one of the state universities of Sri Lanka and also an attorney at law of the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka. And my research interest lies in the fields of disaster risk governance, disaster risk reduction, disaster justice, and sociology of law. As a social legal researcher, when I evaluate the existing legal structure in Sri Lanka, I think I have to emphasize the impact the British colonial era had on the legal structure in Sri Lanka. As the British colonial era just transformed the existing legal structure in Sri Lanka by formalizing both public and private sphere. When we talk about the private sphere, especially the impact it had on social institutions, I think the impact it had on the family relationship stands out. Prior to the colonial era, British colonial era, I would say that the relationships within a family and also predatory was not formalized. With the introduction of the Marriage Registration Ordinance, formulation of a family and how to dissolve it, and also how the pedigree and the property dissolution works were all formalized. And also to talk about the public sphere, both the public health with the introduction of quarantine and disease prevention ordinance, the public health sector was formalized and there was a proper legal structure was introduced into the public health sector. And the factories ordinance was one of the other examples where the rights of employees were introduced into the legal structure in Sri Lanka. And also, as you may know, when we talk about a legal structure, we have two branches, that is civil and criminal law. And the most important documents of civil and criminal law in Sri Lanka was once again introduced during the British colonial era. From the Civil Procedure Code to the Penal Code, as well as the Evidence Ordinance, everything was introduced during the British colonial era. And all these ordinances which I pointed out are still effective in Sri Lanka, subject to several amendments. So to talk about this overall change, which helped to change the social fabric of Sri Lanka, is one of the most interesting things that inspires me all the time when I conduct my researches. And with this, I would like to thank University of Huddersfield for taking this opportunity to celebrate the South Asian Heritage Month. And I think this is a lovely opportunity for all of you to get to know about the beautiful culture of Sri Lanka and other South Asian countries. And remember, you have to visit Sri Lanka in the future. Thank you very much. Aibo.
Greetings, my name is Asitha De Silva from the Global Disaster Resilience Center, School of Applied Sciences. And I'm a PhD researcher, and my research areas are environmental systems, disaster resilience, and community-based knowledge. So I'm a geographer, and being a geographer, I would like to talk a little bit about landscape dynamics of Sri Lanka during the British Empire. Sri Lanka is a beautiful land and an island nation known as the Pearl of the Indian Ocean, enriched with sandy beaches, tropical rainforests, mountains, waterfalls, along with dynamic ethnicities and culture. If we talk about the natural landscape, Sri Lanka has a flat lowland, intermediate plain, and the central highlands, which consist with mountainous landscape. Before 1505, Sri Lanka has a rich agriculture nation which has an advanced irrigated network of tanks where lowlands were converted with paddy fields, mainly in the dry zones of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was known to be the granary of the Indian Ocean, where rice was the prominent export crop. Sri Lanka was under the British Empire from 1815 to 1948. And before that, Sri Lanka was under Dutch and Portuguese from 1505. During the British Empire, coffee was introduced as one of the commercial crops, then the tea, and not to forget the rubber. Sri Lanka is also rich with spices like cinnamon, cardamom, pepper, chilies, and many other herbs. So during the British rule, export economy and the mass production of export crops has changed the natural landscape of Sri Lanka into estate-oriented view. In the past, Central Highlands were preserved as a forest reserve since it is the central watershed for 103 rivers draining around the country. However, changing it into a estate-oriented landscape has its own unique character. During the Second World War, Sri Lanka was a frontline British base against Japanese. Even before that, it was a military frontline for Dutch and Portuguese as well. So if you observe the coastal landscape, there are many forts and ports belong to Dutch, Portuguese, and British era. With all these changes, Sri Lanka has its own unique diversities and characteristics in both natural and built landscape. So I invite you all to visit Sri Lanka and see how the landscape has evolved throughout the timeline. Thank you.
A very good day for you. I'm Malith Senevirathne, a research assistant in the Global Disaster Resilience Center in the School of Applied Sciences, University of Huddersfield. I was born and raised in Sri Lanka until I arrived in the UK for my PhD studies in 2019. My research interests are infrastructure planning, disaster early warning, and evacuation designing. I am a young urban planner specialized in urban designing and infrastructure planning from Sri Lanka. I'm also co-chair of the research committee of the Commonwealth Association of Planners Young Planners Network. Being a citizen of Sri Lanka, I am fortunate to have grown under a rich cultural environment. The arrival of the British in 1815 can be considered as one of the landmark events that happened in Sri Lanka. For more than 100 years, Sri Lanka had been undergoing many changes which impacted Sri Lanka's cultural ecosystem while benefiting the British culture in return. Especially, The rich soil in Sri Lanka provided favorable environs for the tea, coffee and spices plantation, which was exported to overseas via the transportation system built by the British. I would like to share a small story from the colonial period. During the construction of the rail extension to Badulla, the engineers and surveyors found that elevation between the hills at Demodara was too much for the track to negotiate. Therefore, an innovative track design had to be devised. The folklore has it that one of the engineers was inspired after observing a local man undo his turban and retie it around his head. Accordingly, Demodara Tunnel and railway entrance was designed. This Demodara loop is the only spiral loop in the world where a tunnel lies under a railway station. By the 1920s, a well-integrated system of road and railway transportation had been built in Sri Lanka. Not only the transportation, but also schools were built, and so were official buildings like the post office in Nuwara, the Old Parliament in Colombo, and the National Museum in Cinnamon Gardens. The British built the tea planters' bungalows in the hill country, which are now being refurbished as boutique hotels. They constructed parks and green spaces in both Colombo and Nuwara. The most memorable is Colombo's Victoria Park, now called Vihara Mahadevi Park. Adding values from these elements, the heritage and culture of Sri Lanka possess a unique character amongst other values in the world. Therefore, sharing these qualities with everyone to experience and enjoy can be considered as an important value for Sri Lanka's culture.
Hello all, my name is Nuwan Dias. I'm a research fellow in disaster resilience at the Global Disaster Resilience Center, School of Applied Sciences. I do research in climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, urban planning and disaster resilience. I particularly work with Sri Lanka, where I am originally from. So if I talk a little bit about how my cultural heritage has shaped up myself. So I think Sri Lanka is a multi-ethnic and multicultural country with a variety, a diversity. So living in that country and growing up in that sort of a country gives you the extra identity to value each other, to respect each other, respect the differences, respect the cultural value. So when I moved into the United Kingdom has the fundamental British values. The fundamental British values, they have the same thing, rule of law, respect each other. So it was very easy for me to adapt to the British culture because I already inherited those values from Sri Lanka. Currently, Sri Lanka, I think the Sri Lankan system, the Sri Lankan planning system as an urban plan, I would like to say the British architecture, the British planning system has influenced a lot for the Sri Lankan urban planning. For example, the well-known Patrick Gidder's Garden City concept, which was applied in 1921 to the Colombo City Plan of Sri Lanka. It was applied in order to control the diseases and as well as flood prevention. So I would say, imagine in 1921, the flood resilience was a concept in the Sri Lankan planning system, which was adopted from the British planning system, which is amazing. And then, why I am celebrating the South Asian heritage? I think particularly in Sri Lanka, if I take the situation, Sri Lanka is going through a rough time. It is going through economic crisis. But at the same time, Sri Lanka is one of the wonders in the world. It is one of the best travel destinations in the world. It has been the best travel destination for many years, and in 2019 it was the best travel destination by the Lonely Planet. So I think if I can share my message and if I can share my heritage, it will give some idea, it will motivate our students and our colleagues to visit Sri Lanka. Visiting Sri Lanka, because it's a tourism destination with many ancient heritage, cultural identity and natural attractions. So it will help the country to come out. Attracting more tourists will help the country to come out with the economic situation. So that is my key motivation to be a part of this South Asian heritage. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, I am Shavindree Nissanka, a doctoral researcher attached to the Global Disaster Resilience Center, University of Huddersfield, UK. By profession, I am a quantity surveyor and also a chartered management accountant certified by the Chartered Institute in the UK. I'm currently conducting my PhD studies combining my main disciplines of construction and finance. I'm originally from Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka is also known as Ceylon, and it's a small, beautiful island located at the heart of the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka is well known for its natural beauty and cultural heritage. Speaking about the relationship my country shares with the Great Britain, Sri Lanka has been a British colony from 1815 to 1948 for about 130 years. Today, I would like to briefly mention about the economic transition that took place in Sri Lanka during the British colonization period. In the early years of the colonization, Sri Lanka was not seen as an economic asset, but it was exclusively valued as a strategic asset. The main reason for this is the geographic location of the island, being a central hub to the main economic regions worldwide. After the power consolidation in Sri Lanka by the British rulers, then they focused on how to make the island economically profitable. The traditional land tenure system called Rajakarya, the government monopolies in cultivation, and also the traditional institutional system was abolished, promoting free trade, free labor transition, and also the growth of the private sector. Afterwards, the British started experimenting various crops using technological innovations tried in Jamaica. After 15 years of experiments, the coffee cultivation became a success story. However, the most promising success story in the Sri Lankan cultivation history is demarcated by the tea plantation during the British colonization period. The British colonial period came to an end with a lot of deep-rooted connections between Great Britain and Sri Lanka. For an example, still the Ceylon tea is mostly loved by the British here in the UK. I would like to conclude by thanking all for this great opportunity extended to all of us celebrating the South Asian Cultural Week. As Sri Lankans living in the UK, we are immensely proud about our cultural heritage because culture is something that we need to nurture and celebrate. The beauty of the world lies in the diversity of its people. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mahesh Senanayake from Sri Lanka and currently reading for my doctoral degree at the University of Huddersfield, UK. I'm conducting my research on disaster governance with the aim of develop a framework for disaster risk governance in Sri Lanka based on the principle of accountability, which also align with the principles of international frameworks such as Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. In this brief discussion, I will try to discuss some British influences in relation to the political process and governance still we experience in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka at the time called Ceylon, ruled by British as a colony for more than 1.5 century from 1796 to 1948. During this period, British colonial rulers introduced new governance system similar to British to Sri Lanka in order to facilitate their rule. In addition, as a response to the struggle fighters who demand for independence and the autonomy of the country, British Empire sent commissions time to time in order to propose a suitable governance structure for Sri Lanka. Colebrook Cameron Commission in 1833, Crewe McCallum Commission in 1910, Donoughmore Commission in 1931 and Salisbury Commission in 1946 are vital in terms of political change of the country. Among them, the Colebrook proposals considered as the most significant in terms of later political development of the country. For example, introduction of legislative council system to Sri Lanka, even though the council did not have the legislative power as such. It was the base for the development of parliamentary system of the country. Second, the centralized administrative and judicial system was introduced. Then establishment of civil service similar to British, which was started in 1796 as Ceylon Seaways Service, and it continues until today with slight changes. Now we call it Sri Lanka Administrative Service today. Introduction of laissez-faire system of government to convene the British to invite in plantation sector. As a result of that, infrastructure was developed, especially in the highways and railways, rapidly. Elective principle was introduced in 1912 based on the Crewe-McCallum Commission proposals. Until then, the representatives were elected not by the election but by the nomination by the governor. Then the Donomer Commission proposes to introduce universal franchise in 1931. It laid the foundation not only for the representative democracy, welfareism and development of party system in the country, but also contributed significantly to the development of democratic governance in Sri Lanka. These are some of the heritages we experience until today, with changes to fit with the local conditions as a colonial country. Thank you.
Aibowan. That is the way we greet or wish other people in Sri Lanka. Meaning of the word Aibowan is wishing you longevity. I'm Thushara Kamalrathne. I'm a PhD researcher at the Global Disaster Resilience Center in the School of Applied Sciences, University of Huddersfield. My research interests are disaster risk reduction, especially pandemic risk mitigation and preparedness, community studies, and participatory research and planning. Originally, I'm a Sri Lankan. I was born and brought up in the Kandy district, which is located in the central highland region of the country. Kandy is an iconic historical city which is very related to the British era, because Kandy is the last Sri Lankan monarchy and British rulers could not control the entire country until they conquered with the Kandian kingdom in 1815. Professionally, I'm a sociologist. Therefore, I would like to highlight a few points on how the British colonial era has influenced Sri Lankan cultural and social systems. I am pretty sure that everyone would agree with me that there was a huge British impact on the reforms of education and health policies in Sri Lanka that came onto the tables in the 1980s. I'm not going to talk about all of these sectors, but I would like to discuss a few key points on impacts of British era on public health system in Sri Lanka. The foundations of public health care systems were laid down in 1858 in the colonial period. Starting training of Sri Lankans for Western medicine to facilitate state medical care has been initiated during this period, which is a remarkable junctions in the Sri Lankan public health system. And the establishment of the Colombo Medical School in 1870 was a remarkable another milestone in Sri Lankan state medical services, because this initiation accelerated the training of Sri Lankan based medical professionals and extend medical educations in the country. Also, establishment of legal instrument for public health was the important thing which happened during the British colonial period. The critical malaria epidemic that was reported in 1934 to 35 in Sri Lanka was another significant milestone in the Sri Lankan public health sector, because many public health related policies have been reformed during the epidemic in order to make sure free health access is available, especially for neglected remote rural areas. Therefore, influence of British period to shape up the public health system in Sri Lanka is very, very significant. I would like to take this opportunity to thank organizers of South Asian Heritage Month, which is a bridging event of the British history and South Asian heritage and culture. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone. It was a pleasure to celebrate the South Asian Month with all of you. As a proud Sri Lankan, I am also part of this wonderful region with a blend of multicultural and multi-religious identities. And I am Thisara Pereira from the Global Disaster Resilience Center, and currently I am engaging in my doctoral studies where Sri Lanka is used as a case study for my research. So you may know that Sri Lanka is a country with glorious beaches with tropical climate, but also it has countless cultural treasures packed nearly into an area half the size of England. So if you need a realistic example for a country with a peaceful multicultural community, Sri Lanka is one of the best. As a proud Sri Lankan, I have tasted that harmony of our fellow Sri Lankan in everywhere over the country. So you can start the year with Thai Pongal festival in January, where Hindus celebrate and worship the sun and prepare a Pongal meal. And April, you will see the Sinhala and Tamil New Year, which was the major celebration for both the cultures. And even you can prepare milk rice and share oil cakes with both Sinhala and Tamil families as well. In the May season comes the Ramadan festival, one of the biggest celebration of Sri Lankan Muslim community. And also in the December season, you can see the preparation for Christmas, and you can prepare Christmas trees, and also you can pray in the church with our fellow Christians as well. Sri Lanka has long been a favorite long-haul destination for British travelers. Sri Lanka is full of surprises. The first and the foremost thing is anyone can enjoy this cultural diversity with a blend of uniformity. So now the British are inspired to understand the value of a multicultural and multi-religious environment with all of these. So the Sri Lanka and other South Asian cultures have provided a platform to understand it better what is a multicultural and multi-religious environment is. So the real celebration and the real meaning of celebrations comes with the integration of the real meaning of the South Asian cultures. It reflects the true value of a multicultural and multi-religious environment, and also the harmony to live happily and safely without conflicts, wars, and ignorances. I think it is the universal truth that South Asian culture wants to highlight this amazing month. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Kinkini Hemachandra. Currently, I'm working as a researcher at the Global Disaster Resilience Center at the School of Applied Sciences since 2016. As a researcher, I have the opportunity to work with several research projects which has many Asian partners. Throughout these projects, I had the opportunity to work with them to understand their culture and the heritage. As a Sri Lankan also, I do have lots of experiences about the South Asian culture and the heritage. I completed my PhD in gender studies within the disaster resilience context in Sri Lanka. My study is specifically focusing on how to empower women in the decision-making process for building a resilient society. I strongly believe that my research interest was influenced by the Sri Lankan and the South Asian culture and the heritage. There are many examples from Sri Lanka where the country was ruled by several great and successful queens. Not only that, Sri Lanka produced the first female prime minister to the world. I see some influences as well as some similarities within the British history as well. Some very successful female prime ministers in the UK. Apart from all these research experiences, I also see some cultural similarities and influences within the British society which were influenced by the South Asian heritage and the culture. For example, here I experience a very welcoming culture and family bond and family relationships. As a South Asian, we love cooking, we love spices. And I see a great tendency among the British community to use and eat Asian foods which are full of spices. So what I can see is, as a Sri Lankan living in the UK, some level of influences of the South Asian heritage and culture within the British society.
Hello everyone, I'm Chamindi Malalgoda. I'm a senior lecturer attached to the School of Arts and Humanities, and I also lead the quantity surveying program at the Department of Architecture and Built Environment. My research interests are very much linked with disaster resilience in the built environment, and I'm a full member of the university's Global Disaster Resilience Center based at the School of Applied Sciences. I'm currently involved in a number of research projects within the themes of rebuilding communities after displacements, inclusive disaster education, and climate change adaptation in the built environment. I'm originally from Sri Lanka, and I do collaborate with Sri Lankan academics and universities in my research. In 2018, I led a 2-week training program on making cities resilient at the University of Huddersfield to 15 academics from 5 universities in Sri Lanka as part of an EU-funded international credit mobility project. I also lead a research training network on tackling climate change as an underlying disaster risk driver with 8 Sri Lankan universities. This project is designed to develop research capacities amongst the academic staff members of UK and Sri Lanka. As I'm coming from a built environment background, I thought I should share a little bit about how the British architecture has influenced the Sri Lankan built environment. It is correct to say that the architecture of the British period has influenced the Sri Lankan architecture in many ways. We can see a variety of buildings that showcase British architecture at that time. Some of the most prominent styles that these buildings exhibit arise from neoclassical, Renaissance, Victorian and Gothic eras. One classic example is the Old Town Hall building, which was opened in 1873. This was the first civic building at that time. The architecture of this building has the overall features of neo-Gothic buildings with the pointed arches and cast iron columns. There are many more beautiful and unique buildings of British architectural influence around Sri Lanka, with each one having various functions from hotels to civic buildings to hospitals and universities. Thank you.